Hey everyone, I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of how we're going to do these 3D environment layouts. So the first thing that you need to do is take some of the 2D assets that we have made and put them into Photoshop. And you're going to create these kind of background images where the trees are all stacked on top of each other to create more of a tree line. And you're going to create two of these. So one you're going to call BG1 or BG01. And compared to the foreground elements that are slightly more saturated, you're going to lighten it and decrease the saturation just a little bit. And then for the background 02 layer, you're going to do the same exact thing, but even lighter and even more desaturated than background 01. And when you have both of those put together in Photoshop, you're going to take all of these elements and create an alpha mask like this. So just taking a file that's the exact same size, taking the parts that are meant to be showing, making them white, and making the parts that we want to disappear black. Okay, so once we have those, we're going to open up our Maya file. We'll start with a ground plane. You should already have these in your scenes, but I'm just making one right here. Call it ground plane. And then what you're going to do is create two curves, two NURBS circles. One that is just slightly larger than your ground plane, and one that is just slightly larger than that second one. And these are going to be the larger one is going to be your background 02 curve, and the smaller one is going to be your background 01 curve. Okay. So once you have these, just freeze all transformations, so that's at 0. And then what you're going to do is create a plane, and this will be the first of our image planes. So you're going to turn it, rotate it on the X to 90 degrees on your little X-axis over here. Go into your inputs and make it just one face here. Sorry about the background noise. There's a cat in my house that is intent on climbing on every single surface that he can. Assign new material, AI standard surface, full weight on the base, and specular weight is 0. For the color, we're going to use our little background 1 and 2 things that we created in Photoshop. Okay, so here, background 01. This is on the first NURBS curve, so we're going to use background 01. And just going in, getting close to the bottom, making sure that the shape is right. That looks about right. The right size. Kind of lift it up a little bit. There we go. And then, of course, go down to your geometry. Under opacity, you're going to then apply your background 01 alpha. And go to plane shape, Arnold, and uncheck opaque. And unchecking opaque is basically just going to make it so that you don't see the plane when you render it. All right. And we're going to do the same thing for background 02. Assign new material, AI standard surface, And we're going to attach our background O2 file. And background O2 alpha. Cool. So now when we do a test render, let me just put a sky dome on here so you can see. You can kind of see the effect that we're going for when these are going to be lined up. One of them is going to appear to be much closer than the other. And of course, since we're going to be resting on the ground plane, probably pretty close to the ground because we're looking at Elphys, eventually it's going to look like something like that. So yeah, cool. Our picture plane is on the Z axis. So we're going to duplicate this a bunch of times. Or say this is background O2, O1. This plane is background O1, O1. Sonic. Crap. So then now, when I duplicate this, it should be background 102, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, so on. And then what you're going to do is slap all of these into a group and select all of them. Select the background O1 curve. Like this, you're going to go to Modify, Snap Align Objects, and Position Along Curve. There we go. I don't think 7 is enough, so go back. And I'm just going to duplicate a couple more of these. 12 should do it. Modify, Align Objects, Position Along Curve. That's a little better. They're far enough apart that they're not going to intersect. Position them there. Okay, cool. And you're going to do the same thing with the, oh yeah, sorry. Freeze all these transformations once you have it looking right. So now these are background O1 planes. Next thing you can do is the exact same thing with background O2. This is bigger, so I'm going to say 12 would probably do this one. Put these in a group called background O2 planes. Select all of them. Let me make this curve just a little bigger. I'm gonna select both and again, position along curve. So that's pretty good. Again, going down here to check if these are an appropriate height. They could use a little adjusting. So we're gonna make these proper height. I would maybe even make them a little bigger, kind of adjust them so that they come close but don't intersect. I think that looks good. I like that. Okay, so now we've got our background layer 1 and background layer 2, but they're all just facing towards this Z axis. So when the camera goes by, if it goes by this way, you're not going to be able to see it. So what we need to do is point the Z face towards a node that we can control. Here's transformation. Go to modeling, deform, cluster. So yeah, lift this up a little bit. All right, so this cluster, we're going to call it, we're going to duplicate it a couple times. We're going to get BGO1 control, duplicate, BGO2 control, and we're going to make a third one called foreground control, and that will be to control everything that's on the ground plane. Okay, so now that we have the BGO1 control, we're going to go to rigging, constrain, and we're going to click this little box to go to the aim settings. So yeah, what we're going to want to do, because this is the pictures on the z-axis, we want the aim to only affect the z. So aim vector x, y, z, we want x and y to be 0 and z to be 1. That just means that that is the plane that's going to be facing towards the cluster. And then for constraint axes, you can go and check. If you're not sure which constraint axes, we want the it to be able to rotate on the y, so it can do this, and we don't want it to rotate on the x, because we want there to be an illusion of perspective when the camera gets low. And plus the trees look really weird if they face towards the camera when it goes up, so you're only going to do your y and z axes for constraint. Make sure you uncheck that X. All right, so once you have those settings, you're going to take your background 01 control and start constraining these aim vectors. And these should, as you go through them, start moving and facing the cluster. If they don't, go back to your aim control and make sure that you have maintain offset unchecked. Because if maintain offset is checked, then these will not snap to face the cluster. All right, so now all of these background ones are all facing the cluster. You can see when I move the cluster, it's responsive, but not responsive when I do this. I don't know why that side is freaking out, but. And then we're going to do the same thing for background 2 and the background 02 planes. Taking the control, aim constraint each one, going down the line. All of these are going to go to the background 02 control. Cool. So now everything is facing these, and if we move both of these, doot, doot, perfect. It follows the camera, or the cluster wonderfully. For the foreground stuff, it's more specific, but essentially you're going to do that exact same thing where you position them where they need to be positioned, and then make them follow, do that aim constraint to this foreground control. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, but I'm going to cut that part because essentially you'll just be watching the same thing. So once you have all of that, and we render it, it's going to look not great because I forgot to make these opaque. Yeah, so just for example, that's what it looks like when you don't go to your plane under Arnold and uncheck opaque. So if your renders look like that, it's because you didn't make them opaque. Boop. Okay, so now that we have these, we can see that it is actually looking pretty solid. Obviously, the foreground is not as fleshed out, but I really am liking the distance in the background. The one thing I'm noticing is that these planes are kind of right on top of each other. So something that we can do to edit that is just take this background 01 curve and set it to have a parent constraint on the background 01 planes group, not the individual planes themselves, but parent constrain the group. And then, for example, if I want to twist this and make it so that they're in between, and see, that is filling up the space a lot better. And maybe even if the camera is a little high in this scene and I can see some of the bottoms of the background O2 curves, well, then all I have to do is just, excuse me. Then all I have to do is just grab the curve and lower it. So this is a super good tool. Having these curves parent control the backgrounds is just a good tool for them to be a little more controllable, and you can be able to customize the scene a little better. So yeah, once you have this, this is how it should be set up, and the way that we're going to make it so that a camera only sees, has control over the planes. What we're going to do is create a camera, take our 3 clusters, make a group, controls. We're going to take that group, and we're going to put it onto the center of the camera, and then have the camera control the group, not the individual controls. So we're going to take the camera and parent constraint the control group to the camera. And now, when we look through the camera, the trees are going to follow the front of the camera no matter what. So I don't have to worry about them looking like planes. I can just move my camera freely throughout the scene. Oh, here's a good example of something that might go wrong. Sometimes if you have planes that are too close, they'll intersect like this, and that ends up looking kind of ugly. Camera 1 shape. Specifically because they can kind of clip like that. You see how that's clipping a little bit? So in that case, just, you know, adjust this plane a little bit. When you're done, freeze your transformations. Or don't, actually, since we already aim constrained it. Don't do that. Try and check that these are able to rotate freely without intersecting before you aim constrain them. So yeah, and then when it's all rendered out, it looks pretty good. All right, hopefully this helps, and hopefully you can see the goal here.